it's time. Welcome to the NetConf working group session for IETF 119. Okay, it's not working. You should be familiar with the note well. Um, Essentially, by participating in IETF, you're agreeing to follow the IETF procedure and policies. Uh, There are a couple of BCPs on this page that you probably should be familiar with. If you're not, please do familiarize yourself. There is also a code of conduct that IETF follows. It strives for mutual respect, dignity for all, and of course, common sense, decency. Uh, if you want to read up more on it, there is a link at the bottom of the slide for you to go through. All right. If you're in the meeting, yeah, I guess you know the tools. You should be logged into MeetEcho to participate in the meeting, and also, of course, for blue sheet registration. So please make sure you're logged in. You can use the in-meeting version if you're here locally, or of course, if you're participating remotely, you'll have the full tool. There is, of course, an audio-only channel that is also available in case you want to use that. There is a chat window that you can open as a separate window if you want to follow all the discussion there. Okay. All right. Status of workgroup items. The HTTP notif draft has been in ISC telechat. And I think Rob might have an update on when we think it might be able to exit. We have a meeting scheduled later today.
So seven of them are now approved. So I approved them this morning. So they've gone through, and they're now will be in the RFC editor queue now, if not soon. Two of them still need to go through working group through IETF last call, so they're not on your plate.
Yeah, sir. Sorry, I was asking about the HTTPS
Oh, notif one.
notif.
Oh, fine. We'll have discussion for that one. Yes. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's a meeting later today to meet with
Mark
Mark.
Nottingham
Okay.
and Lars. My assumption is this is going to be approved before I step down.
Okay. So stay there because I think the next, you're right, the client server suite of drafts, I noticed you did approve it, send it for publication request, 7 of the 9.
Yeah.
I think what is remaining is probably the NetConf and the RESTConf client server suite of drafts.
But those two still need to go to IETF last call. There's still
Okay.
some comments to resolve, or still comments for me to get back to Kent on.
All right. Anything else?
You're going to take over.
Yeah, probably. The TLS 1.3 draft is, of course, in the RFC editor queue. One draft that we did adopt between 118 and 119 was the UDP client server self groupings draft, and is, of course, being discussed in this meeting. The UDP notif draft is also work in progress, being discussed here. Same is the case with distributed notif. No, actually, it is. This is a slightly older deck. Actually, we never approved. Anyway, so this is a slightly older deck, but I think if I remember, the distributed notif is the one which is work in progress, but not being presented here. Transaction ID, list pagination, private candidate, NetConf, RESTConf extensions to support trace context, and external trace ID. I think all of them are in the agenda that will flash in a minute.
Since this is the older deck, you're probably missing adapt its description, which is not
Yes.
being discussed today.
Good.
Yeah, the list of drafts doesn't mention adaptive description, but it's also a working group document that's not being discussed today.
So here's the agenda for today's meeting. It's a fairly packed agenda. Um, and I think we, of course, have these items that I just mentioned and three more drafts, a set of drafts, I should say, that are also on the agenda. That's the chartered list of items. In the non-chartered items, we do have three drafts, and I believe there is at least two more items. Yeah, NetConf next and ResConf next. And I believe there's a presentation by Thomas on some of the work that was going on in the hackathon. All right. Um, so that's as far as the chair slides are concerned. I just wanted to uh, take a couple of minutes here to thank Rob. He's still the AD, by the way. He doesn't step down till tomorrow. So, but I did want to take the opportunity to say thank you to him from the whole NetConf working group for his years of service. It's truly a service to the community. So thank you.
Thanks, it's been fun, and thank you for stepping up.
So talking of stepping up, I think this was a question that was asked in Ops Area Working Group also. What is my vision for the area as a whole in my time? So I would probably outline it as three items that I am going to try to focus on as much as possible. RFC 3535 and 20 years hence, looking at the work that is started in NMOP and trying to see what it will take to kind of get maybe another workshop or maybe enough input from the operators together to figure out what we did right, what we could do better. The second item, kind of a fallout of that, is to also evaluate where we are in the adoption phase of all the young models that IETF has published, and to try to understand where are some of the shortfalls if in terms of their adoption. Is it a tooling issue? Is it an issue of um, not iterating through it fast enough for the industry to adopt it? So, and kind of an evaluation, maybe a look back to see really what we need to do and come to a decision if we want to pursue, continue doing this work. And the third item is, of course, if we do decide to continue the work, it's really looking at um, all the young models being published to see do they truly work with each other. And I'll give you an example with BGP model that we were working on, and we're still working on it, that it, during its development, touched a couple of other models, the BFT model, the TCP-AO, the TCP model to support TCP-AO, um, and the key chain draft, the routing policy draft. So enough to identify that there were issues as we were trying to put the BGP model together. What I'm saying is I think similarly we need to do an evaluation and look at the existing set of models to more holistically to see do they actually work together or not. So anyway, so that's me and thinking about what I want to target. Ken?
Thank you. I wasn't sure if I should set the timer or not. uh, yes, so I also want to thank Rob for his years and recently publishing my drafts. Thank you. And also to Mahesh for stepping up. And also I want to thank Per for stepping up to being new NetConf co-chair. He's online, by the way. And, I guess technically the, well, actually, I'm not even sure if he's technically still the secretary or chair. He's the chair. Okay.
Yeah, so do welcome and congratulations, Burr.
Yep. And with that, let's move on.
If I if I can just take 1 minute and say thanks to Rob, Ash, Kent for everything. Carry on.
Okay. Chin?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Qing Wu, and the topic I want to present here is a list pagination for young-driven protocols. There are 3 relevant drafts. So the name list here is design team member. Actually, just before this meeting, to facilitate progress of this list pagination suits, actually we design team member get together actually at the end of the last year, December 28, actually to try to discuss all the remaining issues. So in the latest version 03, actually we address this issue. So we like to report back what the change we made in this draft. So this is the overview of list pagination draft. So we have 3 drafts. The first draft is actually define the generic mechanism, allow the client to control the filtering, and also retrieve the subportion of the entry in the list or leaf list. So the client doesn't need to retrieve all the entry in the list, or they only need to retrieve some they are interested in the entry. So in addition, actually, we have 2 other drafts, extend the basic mechanism, to support the NETCONF protocol and the RESTCONF protocols. So current status, actually, we try to, nail down 3, main issue. Actually, we also made some editorial changes. So I will, discuss one by one. For example, cursor pagination, and local aware condition support, and also snapshot support for config force list. Actually, this has been moved to the new individual draft. I think my colleague Perenson will give an update for this new individual draft, and so we separated to try to make other draft in good shape and stable and ready for the next step. So first issue is cursor-based pagination. Actually, in this draft, actually, this change actually apply to 3 drafts, and in this, actually, we actually add a clarification test. Actually, make cursor-based pagination. Must be support for config force list, but it is optional. Support for the config force list. To do so, actually, we set cursor support leaf in the per node capability node in IETF system capability model. And the second change actually is we introduce next cursor and previous cursor, and we also have list key, so we can use these list key or previous next cursor to offset a list of the resource to get access the result set. And in addition, we actually to make a little bit change, we think for leaf list seems there's no conformance, so we added clarification text to highlight the conformance for the leaf list in a similar to the offset list pagination. So we so you can see the example we give here is a list entry that's 6 entry, the first 2 entry actually they they are same, but they only can be distinguished by the position. So so it's similar to the offset. So we add a correcting text to make it more clear. So for how conformance localized for the leaf list. And local aware condition, actually, this is another issue, and this local aware condition need to be exchanged as a capability between the client and server. So local by default, we should be assumed it should be the UTF-8 encoding. And so we give the example, the server can return this kind of encoding with training or without training, like UTF-8. In this example, SE stand for the Swedish language. So we give these kind of cases. So in addition, actually, we renamed the long-length query parameter sort local correlate into the local to make it more simple. And also, for some, failure handling, for example, local may not be supported or passed by the server. So what area information should be, returned? Actually, we actually make a little bit change. We return a local unavailable instead of the local unknown based on the design team member, discussion. So we give the example local aware correlation. Actually, you can see the client can send a request to request, return, the member from the member list defined in the example social data model, and we set the local as SV underlying SE. Actually, this this kind of encoding. Actually, in the response, you can see actually the encoding also get a return and without the training. So another similar example. So client actually also requests the member from the member list actually, but they set a local using the encoding with the training like a UTF-8. So response is very similar. He will respond with this kind of local encoding. Yeah. For other changes we made, or actually editorial changes, especially for young security consideration. Actually, we try to use the young security template, and to follow this kind of template and to make it complete. And in addition, we actually in the appendix we add a local query parameter example. We also expand example social data set. And that's all the change we apply to the 3 draft. I think for the next step, we like to request the working group for the last call. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Just to be clear, this is planned to go to last call.
Just a clarifying question or comments. So for the locale, what impact does that actually have? So the 2 examples just showed it being returned directly. What does the server do with that information?
Can you repeat it?
So when you're asking for the locale, then what's the impact? What's it doing with the locale? So is it changing the sorting mechanism? Or
Yeah.
ordering?
I could clarify as a co-author.
Yeah, Per, go ahead.
Thank you, Shin. That is exactly correct, Robert. It changes the collating order.
Okay.
So
And
it
is
tends to.
And is that something that's optional to support or mandatory to support?
It's mandatory.
Okay. I just
It's
wonder what
not. It's not mandatory to take it in, but it's mandatory to report it.
Okay. And what's the difference between the UTF-8 versions and the non-UTF-8?
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just because on my system, the operating system reports with the .utf-8. It's a Linux system, so it reports the locale with .utf-8 afterwards. But in the draft, it says that they're the same, but you have to support both, so they're equal, with or without the trailing .utf-8.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Per.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Is James here?
Okay, so just some updates on the private candidates draft. The 02 version was released prior to the meeting. Already got some kind of feedback on the list about it, which is good. Two kind of fairly significant changes. We reworked the kind of wording in the draft based on some feedback from the working group about there being kind of too many options that could be selected, to simplify it a little easier. So the concept of manual rebase and auto rebase mode or continuous rebase modes have been removed from the draft, and the wording functions. It gives you the same options, but the wording is just a lot more simple to understand. We also, as a part of that, removed the ability to, or the requirement to, expose to a client what mode you're running in. We think it reads a lot easier now to understand and work through. The other significant update was reworking the RESTConf section, thanks to the support of the working group. And I know that there's been, sorry, that was quick. I'm already done.
Not meant.
I know there's already been some comments on the list, which is great. We need to kind of review those and take those in relation to extending and perfecting this RESTConf section. And I don't know if Carsten's in the room, but there was also a mention of core conf on the list as well, which we hadn't considered in any way at all. So we'd be interested to have a chat and find out a little bit more about how we can address that if it's required.
Let me raise my hand.
Go ahead.
Yes, Kent, as a contributor. I'm sorry, as a chair. This working group only worries about NetConf and RESTConf.
Yes,
It's a different
indeed.
working group that's going to be worried about core conf.
Yes.
So it's really for them to pick it up. I only mentioned that in the email, and it's in parentheses, assuming it would apply to core conf. But I think Karsten replied.
He did, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really a side conversation, but it's not for this working group.
No, exactly, yeah. And I think we just want to understand applicability and whether we need to take it to the other working group or not.
No.
So what we have kind of in the works for 03, obviously the changes that have come back as a result of the feedback on the list in relation to RESTConf, we'll keep working on that section. We still have the Yang models to add. We know that's been outstanding for some time. We're actually going to remove some of the text that deals with how a client should react when it doesn't support private candidates. We think that kind of wording was incorrect and should be removed. And we're going to rework or look at how to rework some of the text, considering the situation where the system may choose to run and update itself and encounters a conflict. And as part of that reworking, it became apparent that we also needed to rework the text in relation to what the resolution modes were doing in terms of both replacing the configuration and marking the element as in conflict or out of conflict, so that it could be resolved at a later date or easier by the system. So that's the update for this one. So any questions?
Rob Wilton as a contributor. Just you go back a couple of slides. I just wanted to update, understand the change. So, so remove both modes and the need to advertise any of them. Will a client be able to know how a server is going to behave?
So the way that the draft is written currently is that it will behave in a single way. It will behave as it were a manual update mode, always. However, a server may choose as a kind of implementation option to run and update itself separately, but not based on how the client would have triggered that at all. So the client, we felt from the kind of reworking of the text, actually the client doesn't need to be aware of that particular activity, because the resultant changes it would be aware of. So, for example, and this kind of ties into some of the work on the third bullet here. Let's say you make a change in one of the candidates that gets committed, and a system has chosen to run an update for whatever reason, whether that's as a trigger or a schedule or whatever the implementation may choose. Those elements in that kind of auto update scenario would get still marked potentially as in conflict, dependent on how we rework this piece of text. And therefore any commit anyway from the client would still fail, and they would still be kind of identified as this is a problem. So you still wouldn't be committing other people's changes without knowledge.
Would a get behavior change though in that case?
No, the get behavior would not change.
For the auto update case, it doesn't.
The get behavior wouldn't have changed in the old wording either, actually. The candidate as stands is what's going to be returned in the get on a candidate, on a private candidate.
I probably need to read it. So I guess the thing that I'm trying to think of in my head is, I know that some server implementations have this flexibility. You can choose which mode to operate in. I don't know whether that's going to be lost here.
And when you say which mode?
Well, whether auto updates or the updates are done manually, because I think that does impact clients, because clients, in terms of how they interact with the server, probably want to know which of those two behaviors are going to happen.
Yeah, and we've definitely taken that into consideration with the rewording. You know, it's clear there are different implementations and different approaches to doing this. But we think the streamlined text covers both of those implementations, coupled with the how you deal with the automatic resolution piece that will come in 0.3, without having to explicitly set it in another mode and then advertise that. Again, we don't have this kind of negotiation thing, so it would really just be I'm working in this mode, which actually we think the client doesn't actually need to know about, given the functional behavior will be the same from the way we've described it. So you will still know that it happens. The client will still see updates or fail updates depending on what situation it's in.
Okay, I need to obviously read it. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, no further questions?
I'm sorry, so what are your thoughts for next steps?
So next steps is to put a 0.3 out fairly quickly after the meeting. That's the plan. And then the next plan was to see how that conclusion goes down with the discussion, particularly around the kind of RESTConf area, which I think is the big piece we need to kind of nail down and get right. And then at that point, we'll consider whether we're in a kind of last call situation.
All right, sounds good.
And I guess also the Yang model.
The Yang models need to go in, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think they're going to be fairly straightforward addition to the existing Yang model, so I suspect they won't be contentious.
Right. Stop the timer. Transaction ID. Yep. All right. I believe Jan is going to present, and I'll pass control to Jan. All right, you should have slide control now.
Very good, thank you. So I will spend a couple of minutes on transaction ID, followed by my comments on PrivCan that we just heard, and then the trace context to drafts. So with 3 short presentations in quick succession. Is that right? So transaction ID is actually very simple. It's nothing has changed. Basically, there are some editorial changes and some important string has changed value, but in principle, everything is as it was. It's because we don't really see a lot of things that is unclear or that needs to be added at this time. At least I haven't heard anything from the list, and I can't think of anything myself. The one thing that people have been mentioning that, well, maybe we shouldn't last call this one right now, it's because of this relation to PrivCan. And even though there are no changes proposed for the transaction ID draft at this time, there is one area of overlap that we'll come back to in a couple of minutes. where we need to sort out how things work. And of course, we have some implementation experience of this. We're probably going to get some more. But the question to the group here is, are we done? Is this time for a last call, or do we have something missing?
Yes, he's asking me to show hands or just ask.
So Jan, just to be clear, are you asking for a show of hands on whether you think, or
I'm just giving you the option to chime in and say something if you want, or otherwise I'll just continue with the next slides.
Okay, yeah. We're creating a show of hands poll.
Okay.
Oops, I'm creating a show of hands.
While that is going, I can show the next slide, which is try to summarize the features of what this is. So all of this work is only relevant for the config true stuff, nothing for config false this time. This is a feature that works with running candidate or even privcand, I think. And it offers reliable and parallel editing from multiple clients without use of any locks. And it's making the management protocol actually considerably more efficient. And it also provides echo detection in Yang push, which is a problem with Yang
Sorry,
push.
Jan, can you hold up? We're doing the show hands poll.
Yeah, sure. I just have to give my ads here for why this is a good thing.
Okay, I don't see it changing much anymore. About a quarter of the room replied, and of that, only about, they said that they had read the draft, which is a little bit less than we probably would want. So I think we can't, it's not appropriate right now to see if if there's a show of hands for adopting the draft, but we can definitely encourage people to read it, and maybe we'll do the adoption. And I mean, you did say there's one more item to resolve with the private candidate.
Yeah.
So
No, nothing to resolve, but there is one area of potential overlap.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's see. We'll work through that, and then we'll try to do encourage people to read the draft before 120. Hopefully get it adopted then. I think this draft would be, ideally, this draft would be adopted into the package, right? Along with private candidate and a couple others.
I mean, it is adopted. It is adopted since a long while back.
Sorry,
But
last call.
what we're talking about now is potential last call.
Yep. Yeah, last call. That's what I meant. All right, let me move to the next slides, the next set of slides.
I had one more on this one, actually. So
Okay, please go ahead.
I think I lost control over them now.
Sorry, try now.
sorry, before we get, James, did you have a question on the transaction ID?
James Cumming, Nokia. Just a quick clarification on this slide. So I believe the draft also covers operational and intended data stores for the GET side of things. Is that right?
Yeah, all right. But you don't have any transaction IDs for the GET parts, for the operational parts.
And then there's nothing in the draft explicitly restricting its use on config false. I know it's not the primary aim, but is there anything like technically that would restrict it?
There are no transaction IDs for the config fault data, so while you can use the operations, it won't give you anything new.
Sure. Okay, but there's nothing there saying that they couldn't be added in future, they were not. not stop.
No, we could make another, if we think as a working group that's what we want to do, we can do that, something similar for config false. But I think that would be a lot of work. It's not something that you just change 2 sentences and everything would be fine.
No, quite. All right, thanks.
James, is there a reason why you're asking? Can you go to the microphone?
Well, in relation to the get side of things, I could see some use cases where you may want to get things that have changed from the various different data stores, as an example.
Okay.
So let's say you had something in intended and expanded version, and maybe it was interesting to see if that expanded version had changed.
Okay, thank you. And I think I passed slide control back to you, Jan.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I agree that there are potential use cases for the operational case or for the config false case as well, definitely. But I did not cover that in this work at all. And the last thing I wanted to say about transaction ID was this. Okay, here's some numbers that I ran with you already a year ago, and we saw that some quite big improvements in performance and no locking and no vulnerabilities. And so I think there are good reasons to implement this. Okay, but let's switch over to the next presentation. Should I just change deck button here?
Yep. Sorry,
I have to do it, but Rob's going to ask a question while I'm changing slides.
So just want to ask a question based on what James said. So is this supported on intended? Because that's obviously config true data store.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
It doesn't mention intended specifically, but the mechanism works the same.
Because that one might be worth clarifying and specifying, because that would probably be useful. Because I'd imagine is that the case that James was thinking of? Yeah, that would make sense to me rather than operational, where I think it would be not helpful.
Thank you.
Try to be mindful of your time. We're about halfway through your 15 minutes for 3 slides.
Yes, that's good. So the next thing was I was thinking about getting into the queue and talking about PrivCan, but I thought I have my own 5 minutes, so I can use them instead. So here's the comments that I had on the version 2 of the PrivCan thing. And here's where it might overlap with transaction ID, because both PrivCan and transaction ID have a concept of conflict. And it would be really nice if we could make those concepts either be the same or at least align so that they work together. And the conflict in the conflict detection in PrivCan 02 is it that if and only if a particular leaf changed to a different value in running and in the PrivCan, then that would be a conflict. In transaction ID 03, the conflict definition is that if a client specifies a transaction ID for a particular node, which could be a leaf, or container, or list item, and the same node or the descendants of it, if that in the case of a container or list item, if those have changed, then that's a conflict. And that gives clients fine control over ignoring some conflicts and even specifying potential conflicts for things it doesn't change. And that's quite important in many use cases that I see. And also the PrivCan detection mechanism can only detect conflicts on leaves and not on containers or list items. So that's I'm not saying that we need to update PrivCan to have the same definition, but it should at least allow this sort of behavior in some way. And when it comes to conflict resolution, the PrivCan draft talks about 3 modes. We have the ignore, overwrite, and revert on conflict, which in traditional Git lingo would be ours, theirs, and stop. But it applies this resolution mode to everything in the candidate. And that's not how you usually merge things that you apply. When you're doing your merge, you're not saying ignore everything or take everything ours or take everything theirs most of the time. So this stop option is the one that I feel is the most common one to use in real work. But that one is in the current version of PrivCand, in the O2 version of PrivCand, can't use it if you have this sort of implementation that I have in mind. So I would like to that it's allowed to do that. And here's the different implementations. You can implement the private candidate as a snapshot or as a diff versus running. And a snapshot, you would take a copy of the entire data store, so then the private candidate can work on that. And that's obviously nice and easy in many ways, but it's also, if the configuration is big, it's expensive. And the other way of doing a snapshot is that you pretend that you copy everything, but you don't. And then you just monitor for changes and do a copy and write. So when somebody commits something else into running, then the original version of what was in running before that change goes into the private candidate. And that's fine as long as there's not a high volume of changes. But if the configuration is large and there's a high volume of changes, it's not so good. Then you want to have this diff versus running instead, where you don't copy anything and the private candidate would change. When things are changing in running and things you haven't touched change, they will show up in your private candidate. So that was my proposed changes, to allow this transaction ID kind of conflict detection mechanism, and to allow revert on conflict. And I saw it on the presentation that you just heard from James and Rob Wills, that some things will be considered at least. That's very good, I think. And I agree totally with the language being much easier and clearer in the PrivCand 02 version versus prior versions. So I'm very happy about that. I see there's several people in line here.
Yeah, James first. Okay.
Just to the last, Balázs and Eriksson, just to the last two slides. This would bring the private candidate more in line with what others are doing. For example, in 3GPP, private candidates or whatever they call similar mechanism only contains the delta that changes. And that means that the prospect of conflicts is much smaller and you can have operators working on separate parts of the configuration.
I'll take that as a show of support.
James Cummingman, Nokia. So thanks, Jan, for the pre-visibility of the discussion. It's been very useful. Not to preempt the 03 version, but we have looked at the prescriptive nature of what is a conflict, and the proposal is to make that significantly more prescriptive, including changes of values, changes of existence of things, changes of orders of lists, etc. In existence or otherwise present containers, and also attributes from Yang metadata on nodes is also a change, a conflict. So the plan is to be much more prescriptive there, and hopefully language that can be reused in multiple places. So that's one of them. Jan, are you able to go back one slide? I think it is. Not that one. You had an implementation slide.
An implementation slide.
That one. That's perfect. So when considering this one and Balázs's comment actually a moment ago, the rest of NetConf and the NMDA architecture kind of really describes the candidate as being a full copy of the configuration, and that's the approach that we wanted to stick with in terms of the private candidate draft. However, the implementation of a server in how you might choose to implement that, I think, is still as open as it is today as to whether you should store, diffs or snapshots or however you choose to do it. And I think that maybe that is not required in the draft to be prescriptive about how a server must implement it, so much as the end result, as per we have with the other NMDA capable drafts.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Balázs Angel. I don't think it's the implementation is that the critical, but the scope of the potential conflicts. If I'm working only on the right branch, I can declare that the left branch, I don't care. Any conflicts are not important for me.
Yeah, and I should be clear that that is the case. I know Jan mentioned in his presentation that he believes the conflict and the resolution is for the entire configuration. That's certainly not the intent or spirit of the draft, and that's part of the reworking that we want to do from the language side of things. It is on a more granular level for sure. If you're editing, you know, one subtree over here and another subtree is changed over here, those two are not in conflict, and so that just continues as normal.
Okay, I just want to be clear though. It's not being limited as to where you can do the edit. You could, I mean, you're just choosing to edit one half of the tree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
There's no
perfect.
kind of partial locking approach at all. It's you can
Okay.
really, you can work wherever you like, but the system, when it's detecting a conflict,
Okay, that
will
sounds
consider whether an individual node is directly in conflict or otherwise, based on the prescriptive list that will come
okay.
in
That
through.
sounds perfect. But the spirit of Jan's presentation here is the opportunity for the private candidate draft to make use of the transaction ID.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your response to that. You said you're going to have more.
Yeah.
More specific mechanisms, I think, with the language you use.
So you're right. I wasn't clear.
but can you,
What we
like-
wanted to do is create a more specific baseline for what is a minimum requirements for meeting a conflict. This is a conflict, but we have purposefully allowed the draft to say that a server will, may apply other restrictions or other resolution modes, essentially. Well, not resolution mode side of things, but the other restrictions as to what is a conflict.
Okay,
And
so
that language would cover transaction ID as the transaction ID changes in its conflict.
So you're saying so transaction ID could be used, but other mechanisms may be used.
Exactly.
or something
The
like that?
idea is that we want to make sure that any draft is available for implementations that do or do not have transaction
and-
IDs available.
Okay, I see. All right, so let's take that to the list as to whether or not we wish to support other mechanisms besides transaction ID, because it is a working group document, and we should not make lives more complicated for the operators than necessary. We are out of time, but let's move. I'm going to close this slide set. Thank you, James, and Jan. I'm going to bring up the next slide set, Jan. But please blaze through it, because we are definitely chewing into someone's time. Yeah, that's not
Sure.
good.
And I'm glad to say it's possible to do it very quickly.
Yeah, like
Oh, this is not the one, but I can say I don't need my slides. The slide the last slide that I had was about transaction context tracing, and yeah, exactly. And basically, there are no changes here. It's done. It's very simple in this case because we are referring to an existing W3C standard, and we're just saying let's use that, and a very trivial mapping for how that is going to happen in NetConf and in RESTconf. And we don't have any ideas about what else needs to be done here, so we think we are done. It's about when an orchestrator talks to a controller, it can propagate the trace IDs so that when you're tracing things in your melt environment, you can actually see how a transaction goes through the orchestrator and what log messages come out of there, and then in the controller, and then from the device, and so on. So we're just saying that we're done, and we hope that somebody will consider last call on for these things. Even though they are just adopted, we are done.
yes, thank you. Any questions or comments while I'm changing slides? I did ask Jan to present that just even though there was no changes, because I think it's always important for work group documents to have a presentation. So thank you, Jan, for doing that. And I'm
Thank you.
trying to take away control. There we go. Perfect. Next. So didn't press the right button.
Hello. So about the trace ID, yeah, the configuration tracing. So there was no no major change except the fact that it was accepted. So basically, just to quickly recall the ID, is the same ID as the previous presentation about the trace ID, but to be able to find whenever there is a change on a particular network element, what was the cause of that change. So to be able to have the trace of the configuration from orchestrator to controller to network element. And so, yeah, basically it's been adopted to use the concept of trace ID instead of transaction ID made it much more simpler. So basically this is why it's kind of in a package with the trace context drafts, and yeah, not much updates. So the next step, we have some issues about how to get the client ID. So basically, when there is a NetConf transaction, to understand who is the client and to identify it so that we can basically trace it. And we need to make sure that we are aligned with the other draft. So basically, at the moment, we are reusing the concept of the trace context, which is the way to transfer the trace ID. And we would need to find a way, and basically this is the alignment that we have. And there is still an open question, which is whether we should change the current version of the Young modeling in order to do something that is more close to the existing, let's say, to the existing model for this the trace context. So basically, this is the current status of this draft.
All right, so in the spirit of trying to reclaim some time, I think this is also a draft that I haven't seen much discussion on the list. If you could try to bring the discussion to the list and these next steps, have that discussed there. And I think that's probably all to say for right now. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
And next, Alex.
Hello. So I'm Alex from Insalion, and I'm presenting an update on the UTP client server draft. So this draft, to give you back a bit of context, was based on the feedback on the UTP notif draft, where there was shown some interest on having a dedicated draft for generic UTP groupings. So in this draft, we define two groupings, one for configuring a UDP client and one for the UTP server. The DTLS ones have been removed following the feedback from Kent. And these are groupings to be used standalone or in combination with other protocol stacks. The status of this document has, it's a working group document now, and we would like to special thanks to Benoit, Ahmed, Chiufan, and Chin for the comments on the mailing list. To give you a bit of specificities on these groupings, so we are defining two groupings, both with the IP address and the local port. The IP address is defined as an IP address without the zone, following the feedback from UDP notif. And right now the port is not mandatory anymore. We have defined the default port as 0 so that the users of this grouping redefine it. And on the draft, not a lot of changes. The security considerations has been rewritten following the young security guidelines. So that's a bit it.
Sorry,
Um,
Kent, as a contributor?
Yeah.
I'm in the queue. As a contributor, your client model there, the remote address, I see it's IP address no zone, but should it be possible to
Yes.
specify a host name?
That's why I have the next slide actually.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
During the working group adoption call, we were raised also that we were not following the TCP client grouping as a structure. So on the TCP, it was defined as a host name. So they were allowing IPv4, IPv6 with the zone, but also host names. On the UDP client one, given that it was from the feedback from the UDP notif draft, it was defined as an IP address no zone, so a more conservative choice. As of now, the UDP notif is the main user of this grouping. So I'm not against on changing that, but also take into account the impact on the other ones. I would like some feedback on this.
Okay, Kent, as a contributor. So UDP Notif is no longer the only consumer of this model. Actually, thank you very much for putting this draft out, because it has saved the day probably in a ISG review for the HTTPS Notif draft. They have been very concerned about lack of support for quick in that draft. And because this draft existed, I was able to create a quick grouping that basically puts together the TLS grouping plus the UDP grouping. And that will probably allow the HPS Notif draft to pass ISG ballot, hopefully today. And so anyway, yes, it's no longer the only consumer, and we shouldn't be thinking of these drafts as having a singular consumer anyway. The entire spirit of the client server suite of drafts is that they are usable by many other contexts. It's perhaps anyway, it's a good thing. It has taken a while to get there, but it's a good thing, and they are being used by other working groups.
I also have the question on the local addresses. Should also this client grouping support the local addresses as the TCP client grouping does? That's also something that were raised by Met during the working group adoption.
Sorry, as a contributor again, as you see in the TCP client grouping, they are with features. So it's always optional to the server if they choose to support that feature or not. And it's useful for in some security contexts where they want to specify a pinhole and a firewall. If they can know the source address, then it actually enables a much more specific firewall rule to be constructed. And I see Tomas nodding his head. Thank you for the support from the operators.
Okay, I will take this direction then for the next iterations then. And then last open issue, also opened by Met, that we were not supporting dual stacks, so a client or a server that supports IPv6 and IPv4 on the same server. So far, I understood that on the TCP one, they were not supported either. Here, I don't have an answer for that. I am open to any suggestions or even contributions, or even opinions on this. Should this be in the scope of the draft, out of scope? Any comments?
Okay, I have more comments. Sorry, as a contributor, but also author of the TCP client server draft, so a lot of familiarity with this. By dual stack, I think you're referring to if you have multiple interfaces.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Oh,
Yes. So there was a general comment many years ago, it was discussed about VRFs, and it was decided to not support VRFs in the core TCP
okay.
model because they were complex and they could be augmented in by as needed in other cases. So I don't know if that response with regards to VRFs applies to your comment or a question with dual stacks, but I think it's probably a similar statement. Maybe others in the room have
Okay.
comment on this. I think I would propose to model after TCP client server. It did exit the ISG review. There were TCP experts that reviewed it. None of them raised a concern, the fact that dual stack or VRFs were not specifically being supported. We have a microphone. Yes.
Rob, as a contributor, I would assume that consistency is a good thing. So I think that's a sensible thing to do. And your argument to say that if you had the issue where you need to support any service under a VRF, you could do that a separate way, makes sense, I think. So to keep it simple initially. If it turns out we're wrong, we can always make it more complex, but otherwise, no.
Okay, very useful comments. Thanks. So that be it for this slide deck.
That was your last slide? Okay, yeah, let me.
Yeah. Yeah, so I am also presenting an update for the UTP notif draft. So since last iteration, we have the draft has been reviewed by Michael from the Transport Directorate review. There has been some minor issues, but also necessary ones that has been addressed on this iteration. And the bigger change, I would say, it was that the generic grouping has been moved to a dedicated draft that I just presented. What minor issues has been applied? So, for example, the space flag to when we are using private media types, we are specifying that the private encoding option should be present in the header. The message ID explicitly that can be wrapped around. Binary fields are in network byte order. Segment numbers, on the other hand, cannot be wrapped around. And also that receivers of the UTP notif should support also the reception of unordered segments. Following the feedback from the last IETF, we have also added a paragraph stating that this protocol should be used when the notifications are expected to be small. When they are expected to be large, please use other protocols such as HTTPS notif. And then, yeah, as I said, we remove the generic grouping from the draft. So far, there are no remaining issues on this draft. We are waiting for the UDP client server draft to be finished. And again, as I said, this impacts also the YANG module of this draft. There were some decisions that were taken some long time ago about the IP address or the mandatory ports. So yeah, welcoming any new feedback. And I also have a slide deck on that. Yeah, so right now, how we configure the UTP notif, we define the address and the port. The port is not mandatory. There was an iteration that we were asking a default port to YANA. If we use right now the grouping, the generic grouping, we should ask for this default port again. And I would also welcome some comments on the remote address since we are taking the generic direction of the UDP grouping one. So
Thomas?
Yes, Thomas as a co-author. We have now 3 draft documents, the UDP notif, the distributed notif, and also the UDP grouping server. I think it would be now the right point maybe to do a final review on all the 3 drafts, getting feedback from the working group, and maybe before the next IETF going last call, you will see at the very end of the NetConf session, I will showing some of the implementations. So right now we have several network vendors working on implementations on those drafts.
Yeah.
Right. I think the idea for the chairs, and I can't speak for them, but would be to send the 3 as a cluster, right?
Yes. Sure. There is a sense of urgency to get these through, and that's why they've been going pretty fast already. Your experience with the IETF is a short tenure, and if you think it's slow, it's not. This is fast. I do have a question, though, as a contributor. Do you have another follow-up?
No, that's all.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. As a contributor, what is the encoding for the payload?
for the payload of the UDP notif,
Yes. Are you passing XML, JSON, CBOR?
so it's young encoding. We have 2 types of media types, public ones and private ones. Private ones, you can encode whatever you want. And on public ones, you have XML, JSON, and CBOR so far within the draft.
Okay. And CBOR, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Definitely, I think a binary encoding would be important for UDP and also for HTTPS notif, but with HTTPS notif, the media type is negotiable. So CBOR could also be conveyed using HTTPS notif. That was my only comment.
So actually, there's a comment in the chat room from Wes, and he's asking, I was hoping that he would come to the mic himself, that in his mind, the dual stack really refers to IPv4 and IPv6 configuration. He wasn't sure. Sorry.
I can come to, yeah, I was a bit late because I was not on the room, but the discussion on dual stack, in my view, I interpret it as a single interface with both v4 and v6. And for me, we should support that in my view. It's not, for me, I don't see it associated with a VRF necessarily.
That's correct.
So it's really a single interface where we have both, at least one v4 and one v6, could be more v6 potentially, because you typically have link local addresses and stuff like that. But I think that for me should be a default configuration, because if you want to support a server with both v4 and v6, I don't want to end up creating 2 interfaces. Right? I want to basically have one interface on the server and have it being addressable by both v4 or v6.
Yeah, so I think what it means probably is that the address is a list and not necessarily a leaf.
Right. Not a singleton, at least.
Yeah.
You said a list, but a list could be more than 2, and we only need at most 2.
I mean, in v6, you could have more than one, by the way, because you typically have a link local address and then you have maybe a global unique address, right? So, but I think it should be at least a 1 for both, but it should be a list in general.
I see. Okay. Thank you for bringing that. I'm not sure what this means to TCP client server, but at least
Should be, I mean, it should be consistent. I agree with that, right? But
well, maybe a tad late.
yeah, that's a bit late. But okay. Yeah.
But maybe consistency versus correctness now with the UDP client. I don't know if we can make that change.
So sure, I mean, we are still on the draft status, right? But yeah, I would also like some consistency with the TCP one, but yeah.
So it shouldn't be an issue. If this needs to be fixed, then we just fix it and things. And then the AD at the time, which won't be me, they need to make a call whether it needs to come back for like a 1 week last call review of that change within this working group should be sufficient. So it depends on the size and the scope of the change. But I think if it needs to be fixed, we can fix it. We'll have some discussion as to whether it needs to be fixed or not.
Okay. Please, let's get contact information and we'll take it to the list. Okay, thank you. Alex, is there anything more? Alex?
Yeah, no, so here, yeah, I would love some feedback on the UDP native Yang module on how to address this, or even if we should also remove the dependency on the UDP client grouping draft, since it could be some more specific ones for the UDP native. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, got the wrong one.
It was the right one, I think.
Oh, it was. This one. Sorry.
Yeah, yes. So I am presenting an update on the native Yang. So to give you a bit of context, this is regarding the structure of the notification of NETCONF event notifications, where it is well defined.
Hey, Alex, sorry, just quickly, I just want to mention, we're transitioning from chartered drafts to unchartered drafts. This is the first of the presentations for unchartered drafts.
Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, this regarding the notification structure, which is well defined within the 5277. But the thing is that it is defined using a XML schema. Therefore, when we are using XML as an encoding, there is no issue validating this message. Since we have the XML schema. But when we are using other encodings, other Yang encodings such as JSON or CBOR, there is no Yang module defining this schema. So that's a gap that we are fighting against in a way in some projects for Yang tooling. And so in this draft, we are defining just this structure. We are updating 5277, and we are using the same URIs and even time leaf in camel case, so that it's backward compatible to the XML schema from NETCONF event notifications. So far, I think it's the fourth iteration now. There are no big changes. We have added one more XML example. I have been also talking to Karsten from Core Working Group regarding the Yang seat allocation. I understood that they were not supporting the automatic allocation for Yang structures. So therefore, right now, we are also proposing a seat file and a seat allocation within the draft. And so we are requesting more feedback from the working group. We understood from the last IETF that there was some interest on filling this gap. So we are requesting the working group adoption. And yeah, open to any comments. And if not, next I will also raise some issues that I found on the notification definition on the encodings. Ahmed.
All right, so a couple questions here. The first one is I have checked the code for LibNetConf too, and they also redefine this XML schema as yen, which is equivalent to Yang anyway. Are you aware of this implementation?
No, that's a good comment. No.
Yeah, and they took a different approach by using a container instead of a structure. So it would be interesting to see what's the differences there. Second, it's a follow-up to a question I asked in last IETF about validation. I was really concerned about validation. So I have two concerns here. One is in the example you show, the structure doesn't define any kind of leaf except of event time, but then all of a sudden content appear in the message. So maybe other people are more familiar with how Yang structure works, but I don't see the schema allowing for other values to be added. It just appears like that. Is it that because of the structure, Yang structures allow any data by default, or something else?
So the thing is that the notifications were defined without the structure. So for example, I'm just showing the slides. On Yang 7950, you have a notification, and on the example, you have the notification container, the event time that was defined on the 5277, and then the content. The content of this notification is defined when you are using the statement notification. What I am defining now is the missing piece of the notification where in 5277 they define that there is a timestamp in the notification. That's why I am defining it I am defining the type notification from Yang. I am not defining a new container in a way.
I see, but I understand that you're not defining a new container, but it seems you're actually defining it like there is a container in the notification because it carries payload. That's right. So it seems it's going to be wrongly defined. One last thing here is for implementation. You mentioned YangKit, but when I looked at YangKit, it doesn't use standard structure implementation. It has added a little bit more code to be specific for this draft. Is that required from all implementations, or just this is how YangKit chooses to implement it? Because I'm not sure how other libraries like libyang or PyYang will use it.
So for YangKit, we are just giving YangKit the Yang module as an input to validate the message, basically.
Yeah,
That's
but they have a specific code. They have a specific code for parsing that.
Yeah. For notifications, yes. Yeah.
So Rob Wilson, just a quick comment back to Ahmed. I think your comment about structure is it the fact that there's extra fields being augmented into that structure? If so, have a quick look at the RC that defines the structure extension. It also has the ability to augment into that structure. So it defines a augment structure extension as well. So that might solve that issue. Otherwise, I think that for me, I think it's really useful to be defining a Yang definition for this message. So I think we should just sort of adopt this and progress it in the working group. Is my view on this, but that's a contributor.
Well, as a chair, that's exactly what we said last time in 118, which is why the IPR call, actually, Alex, you forgot to mention, we just did the IPR call a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And I would have actually kicked off the adoption call prior, but it would have overlapped with this week and then it seemed messy. So the plan is to kick off the adoption call after, like next week we'll kick off the adoption call.
Okay, thanks, Kent.
Okay. And I think do you have anything more? Any more slides, or we're good?
So yeah, since I still have some time, I also want to raise some issues on the encodings. So as I was saying, on XML, there is no issue. There is the definition of and some explicit examples on the 5277, but also on the Yang, on how defining on the Yang a notification and how a NetConf XML notification should look like. On JSON, notifications are not explicitly covered, but somehow they have a non-normative example on the any data field where there are shown some notifications. So we can see that there is a notification with the event time also in camel case following the 5277. But on CBOR, they are not explicitly covered as well, and they define the notification as a container-like structure. And in the section 4.5, covering any data statements, the example uses a notification as an example. But in this case, they just show the CBOR encoding as a simple container without the IETF notification container and event time leaf. So here, since we are kind of fixing a bug on NetConf notifications, I would also like to clarify with the young CBOR authors, or maybe the working group defining this RFC, if this was something they wanted, or it's a bug, an errata here, or how should we address this basically?
Okay, well, as a chair, I mean, this changes the scope just slightly from the adoption perspective, but it's still, I think, within the spirit of what is trying to be achieved. And so it could be worked out as a working group document at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's all for me.
All right, thank you.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, hi, hi. Yes, we can hear you. Let me, where are you? Can
I'm
you?
online.
No, I see you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to find you on my screen so I can pass a slide control to you. Zhao,
ZHUO.
yes, I know. Okay, I see you. Okay, you have slide control.
Yep. See it. Thanks. So I'm presenting the 01 version of draft augmented by addition into the IETF Young library, and the main changes in this version including updating the title named the augmentation to augmented byte, and we also add use cases sections in the draft. And we also have Young link validations for the modules in the appendix, and also during the hackathon, we have an open source implementation for this feature augmented by leaf list in the library libyang and sys report. So some background informations. The motivation for this draft is to provide an easy solutions for getting all the YARN dependencies from the IETF YARN library defined in RFC 8525. And this is the background is that currently there is a need for the real-time knowledge of YARN dependencies, and it is not possible to do that to get all those information directly from the IETF YARN library because the augmentation is missing. And the most tricky dependency to get is the reverse dependency, the derivation and the augmentations, because they are defined external to the module but apply internally. And this is our use cases edit. So the first one is the YARN and Kafka data mesh architectures, within which the schema registry is introduced between the collector and the data consumers to preserve the YARN schemas so that they're accessible for both. And to build such a schema registry, we need the full YARN, all the YARN models and the that's concerns in the YARN push subscriptions and along with its dependencies. And for the data catalog proposed by Nacho, this is to build a data catalog that provides all the YARN modules and the YARN dependencies so that they are accessible for the clients to see. As alternative, it is to getting this YARN dependencies from IETF YARN library is not the only solutions. We also have to get all schemas and pass the real-time pass the first message we receive in the YARN push subscriptions, but they are not ideal in the data's real-time ingestion background. For example, for the get all schema, it is way too time consuming, and according to our test, to perform such an executions could take up to 5 minutes, and that's not ideal and not acceptable in our current background. So its values are quite obvious in this regard. It is easy to implement with the deviations in the module already, and it can also provide an easy solution for us to get all the full YARN relationships by sending a simple GET request to the IETF YARN library. but the questions remains here are if the deprecated container module states should also be augmented or not. Since this module states container, I think it's inherited from the IETF YARN library in RFC 7895. But I think I see from the some open source libraries such as the LibYang, it is still being used. So this is a question remained. And the second question is whether we should set the module set name as a key too. This is because according to Yan's comments from the previous versions, some vendors implement the modules into different sets, and having this module sets name also as a key and also the module name as a key could enable that augmenting the module defined in another set possible. So if there's a value, then maybe we should do it or not. But for this one, there's a YARN link validation example provided in Appendix 8, and it is showing that currently this action is not it's illegal. And then to make it more obvious, here is the tree of the augmented IETF YARN library. And then it's the hackathon demo that we have done during, but obviously this is not updated. The slides is not updated, but from the picture above is the container module states that has been augmented with name and revision as the key. For the other ones, for the IETF YARN library in 8525, it is not shown here. But it's available. It's in my link. So the next step I would say is to solve the questions proposed and then call for NETCONF adoptions. And thank you so much.
Kent is the contributor. Can you go back to your questions slide? Two questions.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, so for question number one, should this draft also augment the special module state module, right? So this would be an NMDA. We call them I forget the term for it, but the support for legacy servers that don't support the NMDA. We try to have a state module for them. But that whole strategy was some time ago. Benoit, you were the one that was instrumental in pushing through that. I mean, I suppose it's still current IETF statements are that servers should implement NMDA. And it's almost gotten to the point where it's expected that modules are NMDA compliant. In fact, I don't think IETF would publish a Yang module that's not NMDA compliant. So for how long do we continue to try to support legacy non-MDA servers? This is a question for ADs. I'll throw out there something that's probably going to get me in trouble, that the key store and trust store drafts have the ability for built-in trust anchors and built-in keys that would be reported as basically config true nodes that are config false values. They're being reported as an op state. In order to get that, you would have to have implemented the operational state data store, which means you're an NMDA server. So as of right now, the key store and trust store drafts are really only for, at least if you wish to have built-in keys and trust anchors, then you need to be an NMDA server. So anyway, we're kind of in this, it's the same boat. I'll share that. We're in the same boat on this one.
Benoit Clé speaking. So your assessment is right. So if we look in the industry who's supporting the latest NMDA IETF library, there's a mixed. So we could do the right thing and only update 7895 and say, you know, if you want to use this, well, you have to go to an MDA. Or we could say we update the old Yang library, but how long are we going to do that? So it's a direction call. We could go either ways in this draft.
I mean, so as a chair, actually, I'd love to hear from the ADs as well, but as chair or contributor, but I mean, we've allowed for almost how many years of transition period? It's been, you know, it hasn't been, it's not short, right? So it's been some time, and we can view this as a pay for play kind of, you know, thing where it's a minor gentle push. You know, let's get NMDA deployed. It's now's the time. We shouldn't allow for non-NMDA servers to just run forever.
There is just one distinction between the Yang modules. There is the Yang module that are technically specific and for which an MDA was by default. And there is the one which is like foundational, like this one, to do discovery. So maybe a slightly different treatment here. I don't know. We could go either way.
Yes. So Rob, I'm not sure I feel strongly on this. There's like a pragmatism that says it's not expensive to add this in, so why would we not do it? I'm not sure this is the thing to like put a stake in the ground for. Is my personal view. So I would just do it, and it's fine. It's deprecated and not have an issue. I do have some other questions though, if there's time for those, and that's that. So I'm slightly concerned about the idea of getting the augments out from other module sets. I worry whether that is sort of effectively going past a boundary that might not be a good idea to go past. So that I think needs consideration as to whether that's a good idea or not. The other thought I've had is that I can't remember which one of the versioning drafts, probably the semantic versioning draft, also augments in a value into Yang library. And I'm wondering whether the version ID, version string, and I'm wondering whether publishing a new BIS version of IETF Yang library would be a cleaner way to get both of these changes in rather than doing those augmentations. So I think that if we do progress with these, I think we should consider that as an option.
James going, okay. I had 2 points. I mean, I agree that we should currently continue by doing module state as well. And its relation to the should we start to move away from non-NMDA compliant implementations. I brought that up in the NetConf next context as well. That's one of my things that I feel we should probably discuss in the next side of things is do we move from a minor revision change to a major revision change of NetConf, and that may be a good boundary point for it. That was one option. And then the other one was, the other comment I had was similar to Rob's last one actually, that and I haven't read it in detail, so maybe I missed something, but it seemed that the approach here was to add the augmented by into Yang library by an augment itself, which felt like it may be a bit circular. It might be a better idea to publish a new Yang library to include this in the same way that deviations is included.
Yes, we are publishing another module to augment it, not itself.
Yes, and I think maybe my suggestion was that it might be better to publish an updated Yang library instead.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. It would be circular, I believe, because then you'd have the augment, the Yang library is augmenting itself. It just goes, yeah. Okay. Thank you. You're done with the presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for very interesting. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this goes back to Per. Pass slide control to you, Per.
Thank you. Yes, so on behalf of the authors of the list pagination design team, I present list pagination snapshots for Yang-driven protocols. And this has been moved out from the list pagination set of drafts. Okay, so it is based on, as I said, it's based on the work from the list pagination draft, put in a separate draft, as Shin said earlier, to not impede the list pagination, which is more or less done. But we have a list of requirements, open questions that we need to resolve to have a solution for snapshots. The requirements are that have been identified are these. What should a snapshot include? And it has been discussed before. The entire list, take a snapshot of the list keys, and so on. How should a snapshot be reused? So, for instance, RESTconf would need to be able to address the snapshot between sessions in some way during a pagination. And what is the life cycle of a snapshot? That is not clear either, and need to be worked out. Should they be automatically deallocated after some timeout, and so on. So continuing, how should signal then? Maybe signal that snapshot should be deallocated. What happens when a server is unable to allocate a snapshot due to resource constraints? Is there an implicit deallocation when the pagination is finished? And is the pagination finished when you reach the last page or not? And then security considerations for protecting them against denial of service, taking many huge snapshots. So the solution overview, this is basically what was in the list pagination drafts. There's a new snapshot query parameter for RESTconf and NetConf. Snapshot support for config false lists and leaf lists. And support is signaled to the client that the server supports it in the IETF system capabilities. Per node capabilities is augmented with a snapshot leaf. And there's a Yang model to define this for NetConf, the query parameter, the augments to RPCs, error identity, if I recall correctly. So the snapshot query parameter enables clients to request the server to take a snapshot, may be supported for config false lists and leaf lists, and it's default false. And if snapshots is not supported, the server then returns snapshot not supported in the error at tag. For NetConf, the snapshot node or leaf is added to get config and get data, and we augment this snapshot param grouping into these RPCs. So this is the snapshot query parameter for NetConf. We add the leaf to the RPCs and then augment the snapshot leaf into per node capabilities. Snapshot query parameter for RESTconf, it's supported for get and head. If there's no support, we return 501 not implemented, set error type application, error tag invalid value, and set the error at tag snapshot not supported. If it's unsupported, we return bad request and set error tag not supported. Standard stuff. The Yang model, IETF list pagination snapshot, has this namespace and the prefix LPG snap. Introduces a RESTconf capability that can be discovered by a client, RESTconf client. So next steps is to adopt a document if the working group finds it interesting work. continue work on the open questions in the requirements that have been identified, possibly thinking hard if there is anything else that needs to be solved, and request more feedback from the working group. That is that presentation. Thank you. Questions?
Well, I guess I have a question to the working group, which is, so Snapshot was removed from the list pagination suite of drafts because one, it was complicated, and two, it was unclear how strong the support was, or the interest was, I should say. So, I mean, we can gauge interest through various mechanisms, adoption call, show of hands, but really, I'm just kind of wondering, is there anyone in the room who's interested? Like, is this actually something that, or do you feel like maybe it's not, you're interested, but not now. You'd rather get some experience with the current suite of list pagination drafts that are imminent to be last called, and then revisit the idea. Is this too early for its time? Are any thoughts about that in the room? Joe, yes, please, Joe.
Joe Clark, Cisco. I wasn't really prepared to answer your question except with a maybe, because as I was listening to this and thinking, okay, you pulled this out of list pagination. Is there something more valuable in an overall operational snapshot of the device? So I get it. You want to paginate a long list, but maybe there are dependencies in that list in other lists. And what if I want to get like I'm an operator, I want to see the state of my device. I start paginating a list and I kind of want to freeze frame the device and look at other things. I get the questions you have. They're deep and potentially complicated to answer, but I wonder if there's more to this feature that might add more value to for operators.
Rob Bolton. So as a contributor, I was just looking at this. My concern with this snapshot, especially if it applies to operational data, is what's the cost to implement it? So certainly in the systems I'm aware of, the operational data is heavily distributed across the system. There's no single data store that's storing it. And performing a snapshot against that would require a lot of code changes everywhere to do it. So, or alternatively, fetching a lot of data and storing it in memory for one point in time. So I worry that for large data sets, we simply wouldn't support this anyway. And then I wonder how useful it is. If you ask to say snapshot the rib or something, is that something that the systems are going to handle or not handle? And similar issues occur when looking at Yang push when it asks for like an initial sync with on change events. Is how do you synchronize those things? Again, it's complicated.
Mm-hmm. True. And I mean, because it would be a separate draft, servers could choose to implement or not implement. Presumably it'd come with features as well. The servers could then further refine whether or not they allow snapshotting on just config or also on upstate. Or maybe even for specific lists, specific lists can be snapshotted versus others because you may have a federated database and some of your data is in a database that supports snapshotting natively, and so you can, but other of your data is in a different database that doesn't, and so you don't want to for there. So presumably it would be, servers could opt in to supporting the parts that they choose. I guess, so from that perspective, implementations would choose to do it only if the demand was there. But to the working group would be, is it, maybe Per can express like how much more complexity is there into trying to bring this draft, to publish it. Is it a very complex topic that it would to get it fully published? Is it something that we should spend working group cycles on?
So to be totally honest, there's a reason why it was put in a separate draft. It was actually Chifang who asked the last IETF, and then all these questions that were presented here came up in my head at least. And this is mostly not from this on the server implementation, but actually how a client would handle it. So most of the server implementation and problems with performance and size and so on is glanced over really quick in a few bullet points. But it's also sort of how is a client supposed to handle the life cycle of this snapshot. I think it is interesting, of course, but as has been stated in the room, maybe not exactly now. I have no further comments.
Okay, so this is tough because we're both chairs and co-authors on this draft. So we may have to defer to AD to help.
Which one? Current? Or
The current. I'm turning to Mahesh. It falls on Mahesh.
Not till tomorrow.
Well, okay, it doesn't have to be.
I can say one thing, short. I would like to carry on to the next presentation as well, but really short to conclude. This was raised from the working group that it should be worked on, but there has not been that much interest in working on it. So if we should work on this, we'll take it to the list, and there has to drum up some interest there.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. I think it's still a 0-0 draft. I know the topic itself is not new, but it's still 0-0 draft. So let it simmer for some time and have some discussion.
Right. Okay.
So we encourage participation in this work.
Yeah, I was going to say almost like freeze the draft for a while and just see how the list pagination goes, and maybe bring it back in a year's time and see then there'd be more indication as to whether it's needed or not. That's my thought.
Okay. Thank you, Per. We are on time, but just barely. So I'm going to quickly move to the next slide, which is also Per.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I have control. So quickly to report back on the NetConf Next and RESTConf Next work that has been done in the working group. So the current status is that we have had 2 interim meetings, and we have formed design teams, NetConf Next DT and RESTConf Next DT. There is still room for more volunteers to work on this, and we encourage participation. So a report from the interim meetings. The issues on GitHub are now on NetConf Next are 34, and the last interim it was 31, and RESTConf it's 15 open issues, and so a bit gain there as well. There are several backwards compatible extensions in progress in drafts, and that we have seen presented here earlier as well. Just short, Yang Next has actually 104, I think, open GitHub issues currently. And the meetings were one in December last year and January this year. So the identified categories of work are these 3 categories: backward compatible extensions, which require no protocol upgrade, and there are already ongoing efforts for this that we have seen. Second category is minor protocol upgrades with just made-up numbers, version numbers, NetConf 1.2 and RESTConf 1.1, maybe, which would be more or less backwards compatible. And then the last category, the sledgehammer, would be a major protocol upgrade that is most probably, or maybe definitely even, non-backwards compatible and even requiring Yang Next. So the next steps in the work is to, the plan has been to create repositories for minor new minor protocol updates, and then in the design teams work on non-backwards compatible minor protocol updates separately, and then that the design teams can also start work on major protocol versions as well. Volunteers are encouraged to participate, so we need facilitators of the work, editors for drafts, authors and co-authors of drafts. So please join the effort. And the effort going forward are the mailing lists for the design teams, probably having recurring design team meetings and interims, discussing the work, both status and direction. These are the mailing lists. You can find them on the IETF mailing list page. Join those. And I think that is it. Yeah, questions. I'll leave this slide open. And if anyone has any questions. Yeah, Mahesh.
Right. So I just want to reiterate Per's point. This is for the working group, by the working group. So the participation has to come from the working group if we want to make progress, and if there's a desire to even have NetConf next and RESTConf next. The question, Per, that I have for you is, in terms of the issues that are open, do we have labels for the fact whether they are minor updates or major updates, so that people can take stock of what they want to work on maybe?
Yeah, I don't think every topic or every issue is classified into those categories yet. So that is also work that needs to be done by the design teams, probably. That it has been started, and many of you have participated in that, but there still needs to the issues need to be classified still.
Okay, Kent as a contributor. Can you move to the next slide, I think? Actually, not even a contributor.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, previous slide then. Okay. Maybe slide 8. 7. One more. Okay, forget it. I'll just talk to it. Yeah, right. You mentioned there's these 3 categories, right? And that, yes, that slide. Thank you. 4. The 3rd category, requiring Yang Next. So just like Yang Next will probably be mentioned in the NetMod meeting on Thursday, but everyone should be aware that that is going to be a large effort. It will take a significant amount of time. And so the thinking being is that we could do minor protocol updates, like a NetConf 1.2 and a RESTConf 1.1, to, in the meanwhile, to resolve a number of the minor issues that are known, but can be resolved in a backwards compatible way, while waiting for the Yang Next to finally become ready. And then we'd move forward with the major protocol updates for NetConf and RESTConf. So that's kind of the overarching plan for this work.
Mark?
Hello, Marc Blanchet. I'm not involved in NetConf in general, so maybe my question will be completely out of scope. But I'm involved in another project where we would need NetConf over Quick. And I was wondering if that's something that you've been thinking. I saw a draft, but not the working group draft. So I was wondering if there's anything coming in the pipeline about that.
Right. The only history that we know of is that the draft was presented in the Quick working group, where the chairs decided that the draft needed to come to NetConf. The authors never showed interest to show up. So maybe if there's interest, someone needs to pick up that draft and bring it to the NetConf working group.
So I've got a question for you. So you said you need NetConf over Quick. Can you clarify what the reasons are, what the benefits will need to offer?
Sure. So initiative is about IP in deep space, where you have delays like minutes, hours, and therefore Quick with with a few, config, you could enable traffic, quick connections over long delays. And then, then we're looking at, having the whole suite of solutions, including network management. And then overquick would be there because NetConf over TCP doesn't, won't work in any way. TCP is out of question in deep space.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is our last presentation. It wasn't originally on the agenda, but Tomas asked if he could present some results from the hackathon past weekend. So please, you just have 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for accommodating. I just thought let's present some results from the hackathon in terms of the Yang push validation we did on the publisher and receiver side. So we had two network vendor implementations from Sixwind and Huawei, and an open source implementation on the data collection side from PSA CCT. In the test repository, you will find the test results and also the PCAPs we did during the hackathon. That's a document we were presenting this week at NMOP, showing the overall architecture of the Yang push to Apache Kafka integration. And on the right-hand side, all the documents in the NetConf working group which are applying to this architecture, and we started to validate in the implementations. Here an example of the subscription start notification message, which was augmented by the support of hostname and sequencing in Yang notifications. Here, then a second implementation on the support of versioning in Yang notification. Also subscription startup message. And here we have a push update notification where it's augmented with the hostname and sequencing. And a push change update notification here on top of the support and hostname sequencing. Also the state change observation timestamping. And that's the overview on the different draft and RFC documents and which vendor applies were. This will be continuously throughout the next IETFs. We're going to update that list as we're receiving new code. And here just a summary to give an overview on the draft documents we presented at NetConf so far, and the Yang push to Kafka architecture draft at NMOP. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. I love these hackathon reports. I hope we get more in future meetings.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, I just have a concluding remark, I guess, which is that I looked at the history, the documents, the NetConf documents history, and since 2019, we've only published 3. But lucky Mahesh. Well, actually, Rob did some of the work, right? There's like 8 that are moved forward with Rob. But then if you include the RESTconf client server, NetConf client server, the list pagination drafts, the UDP drafts, the trace and transaction drafts, there's easily another 10 that are coming through quickly. So welcome to your AD ship. We hope to give you an entertaining first year.
Yeah. Hopefully, a lot of these, of course, as Thomas will tell you, these are holes that had to be filled to get Yang push to a state where there were actually workable solutions. So I'm happy that that work is going on, and I'm happy to progress these drafts as soon as possible.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Good meeting, and have a good rest of week.
Speaking of progressing drafts, when are you going to get 15 of your IETF types drafts? I'm getting lit up on GitHub.
Yeah. What about?
It's great in all module validation. Oh yes. getting lit up on GitHub.
Okay.
No one's yanking on my life, no one. But anything that goes down